This is the DJI Action 4. DJI's latest action camera that can shoot 4K at 120 frames per second, shoots in 10-bit with a log profile for amazing colours, industry-leading Rocksteady Plus stabilisation, magnetic quick release built in, and dual touchscreens. But what's new from the Action 3? I mean, at first glance, the Action 4 looks exactly like the Action 3, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that nothing's changed. But it's what's on the inside that makes this camera much better than the competition. Starting with this, arguably the most important part of the camera, the sensor. Full disclosure, DJI are actually sponsoring this video and have sent me the product to review, but they've encouraged me to be honest about the pros and cons as long as the video is factually correct. The sensor on the Action 4 has been upgraded from a 1/1.7 inch sensor to a 1/1.3 inch sensor. In short, this is a bigger sensor which in theory can let in more light, which will show less noise and have a higher dynamic range. So what a better way to test that than an epic sunset horse ride. Unfortunately though, this is British summer, so the sun is nowhere to be seen. So here's some cloudy horse riding instead. Everything in the interface and design is created to make this camera as easy to use as possible, and that was so obvious to me as soon as we got into this shoot. Having the ability to save my favourite modes as quick switch modes meant that rather than fiddling with settings between takes, I just hit the quick switch button to change between the modes I wanted to use. And just like the Action 3, it has the big screen on the back, but also one on the front as well if you're filming yourself. And you can also use the front one as a touch screen to change all of your settings and all of your different modes without having to switch it around and go to the back screen. This is so handy, and only DJI is doing this at the moment. Having the front screen as a touch screen so I could change the settings meant I never had to take the camera off the mount. This camera also has 8x slow-mo, which films at 1080p, and let's be honest, it doesn't look quite as good as the 4K, but it still makes for some pretty epic shots. All of this is well and good, but it means nothing if the stabilisation isn't on point, and that's why we've come to Southampton Bike Park, and we're going to attach the DJI Action 4 to a couple of bike riders, see what the stabilisation like, tried a few different modes, and yeah, let's get into it. It's at this point where the magnetic quick release system on the Action 4 comes in handy. The Action 4, just like the 3, has a little magnetic quick release on the bottom of the camera, and it's also comes on the side of the little case that the camera comes with, just in case you wanted to mount it vertically. And then you get these little quick release magnetic accessories that you can attach to any of your mounts. So on the bike shoot, we did the chest mount and the head mount and switch between them. Usually every time you switch mounts, you would have to unscrew and rescrew these screws, and it gets really annoying. But with the DJI system, all you have to do is attach the little sort of magnetic quick release adapter onto any mount that you want to connect up to, and then you can just pop the camera on like that, and you're good to go. And then when you want to take it off, all you have to do is push down, take the camera off like that. We've got our little chest mount here, and we just pop it on the chest mount, and then we're good to shoot again. And the attachment is not just magnets as well, it's got these little hooks that actually go inside the camera. It doesn't shake or wobble at all, and trust me, that is never coming off of there. So this shoot was pretty ideal lighting conditions, and the stabilisation on the Action 4 was, I have to say, it's pretty incredible, to be honest. The regular Rocksteady stabilisation was just enough to stabilise the really shaky movements of the bike, but also not enough that it sort of took you away from the action, so it still had some of those bumps and made you really feel like you were on the bike. With the Rocksteady Plus, it was more of an FPV sort of smooth feel. It took out even more of those bumps and made it feel a little bit more smooth. So you can really sort of dial in how much stabilisation you want, depending on whether you want sort of a more realistic bumpy look or whether you want a sort of smooth FPV style look. Either way, I thought it was so impressive how well it stabilises the footage, and there was little to no stabilisation artifacts as well, which sometimes you can get in more challenging scenarios. It's this shoot as well which really made me appreciate the image quality. The quality of these shots is so good, and the detail is all there. It's not just over sharpening, it's actual real detail. And you can see that with the detail in the leaves in the background, which sometimes action cameras struggle with when you're sort of doing fast movements. All the leaves will sort of blur into each other, and it'll be a bit of a sort of artifacty mess in the leaves. But this has actually done a really good job at keeping all of that in focus and in detail. And if the image is still too over sharpened for you, you can go into the settings and dial in just how much sharpening you want, and the same is true with noise reduction. And that dynamic range on the D-Log-M really allows us to keep the detail from the sky, which is actually a very white sky, and still keep everything on the ground really well exposed. This is all shot on auto exposure, and you can't really see any dramatic changes in exposure as things go on. So if you're watching this, you're probably still wondering about the overheating. Well, in my tests inside at room temperature, the camera lasted at 4K 50 frames per second, 28 minutes and 38 seconds before it stopped recording due to overheating. And in 4K at 100 frames per second, the camera lasted 15 minutes and 39 seconds, again before stopping recording due to overheating. So far, I'm close to calling this the best action camera you can get right now as of recording this video, and that's not because it does anything that will really blow your socks off, but because everything that it does a little bit better than the competition. You've got the bigger sensor, you've got the true 10-bit log footage, which allows you to change some of the colours without too much degradation in the image. You've got the 4K 100 frames per second, which doesn't look like a downgrade in quality. You've got the front touchscreen and the magnetic mount. Everything in this action camera just feels really well refined. So let's do some harder tests to put it through its paces. Now the battery lasts quite a while on this camera, but between shoots I've been putting the batteries in this charger that comes with the Adventure combo. It takes 3 batteries, has little LED indicators to show whether the battery is full or has been used, and when you plug it in it will start to charge those batteries one by one. In my testing this took about 20 to 30 minutes each battery to charge to full. So in theory then, this bigger sensor, 10-bit colour and great stabilisation should make this really good for indoor sports too. That's why I've come to the Summer League basketball in Southampton. A player has agreed to wear the camera while they play an actual match, and I'm buzzing to see what we can get from it. So you can see in lower light conditions indoors, there's definitely some more artifacts from the stabilisation, and that's because the shutter speed is having to slow right down to compensate for that exposure. And this digital stabilisation you get in these action cameras generally can't handle the slower shutter speeds. Having said that though, it's not overly jarring and it's still definitely usable. I was honestly really impressed with the detail of the image as well. Again, that larger sensor, letting in more light, taking in more information. And I was honestly expecting, like other action cameras, when you get indoors, for it to go a bit mushy, especially when you're doing a lot of action stuff. But really this kept the detail really well. And again, I have to sort of reiterate, even though it's quite a small sensor, this isn't like artificial sharpening you're seeing. Of course there is an element of that, but it still feels like it's actually capturing real life detail as well. It's worth noting that to improve this camera's low light quality, you can turn on low light image enhancement, which just helps manage that noise. You can also turn on EIS priority in low light, which prioritizes the electronic stabilization, so you shouldn't get as much of those digital stabilization artifacts. Swinging back to ease of use, having the app to preview the footage from the sidelines meant I always knew the angle I was getting and could start and stop recording as well as change the settings without interrupting the match or touching the camera. The connection from the app isn't great though, it wouldn't work from one side of the court to the other, so the range isn't the best. So after having my fun with it, there's definitely a couple of things that I do wish we had in this camera. And the first, which I said in the Action 3 review as well, is a narrow field of view. So you've only got ultra wide, wide, and then a kind of de-warped version of the wide, which is about 15mm I think. And that's great for action footage if you're doing sort of really intense action and you just want the widest possible view for that sort of FPV look. But I know that most people are using action cameras also as like a walk around camera or a dad cam, and I do think 15mm is slightly too wide for that usage. So I do think this camera just needs that narrow or linear field of view, somewhere around 24 or 28mm, just for the people that don't always need that ultra wide look. It's been done on the GoPro, so I don't see why they can't do it on a camera like this. It's worth noting that there is a narrow mode, but it's only in 1080p or 2.7K. The only other thing, which might be personal preference, is on the GoPro 11 at the moment we have that sort of square sensor, which allows you to record an almost square image and crop it afterwards to horizontal or vertical. And I think that's kind of the future and where cameras are going at the moment. So I hope that DJI will come out with something like this in the future as well. Otherwise though, this is the closest you're going to get right now to a perfect action camera. And yes, not a head of a lot has changed since the Action 3, but those small changes have made a huge difference which put it ahead of the competition, specifically in image quality. If you've already got the Action 3 and you find yourself filming mostly outdoors in bright sunny conditions, you might not want to upgrade to the Action 4 because you might not notice the difference. But if you're in the market for an action camera with best in class image quality, or you might find yourself filming in some low light or indoor conditions and still want that great quality, then the Action 4 is definitely your guy. That's been it from me. If you've got any comments or questions on the DJI Action 4, leave them down below in the comment section. If you found this video informative or helpful at all, then leave a thumbs up. Of course, it helps with the algorithm. And if you want to see more videos like this on Tech for Creatives, then subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.